It starts with a feeling that is difficult to describe to anyone who doesn't share it. It's the feeling you get when you are driving your car alone at night. The windows are up. The world is moving past you in a blur of lights and shadows. There is no one in the passenger seat. There is no one expecting a response. There is no one monitoring your expression, your music choice, or your posture. And in that sealed, silent metal box, you don't feel empty. You don't feel isolated. You feel a sudden, rushing sense of completeness. You feel a density of existence that vanishes the moment another human being enters the space. For most people, the absence of others is a vacuum. It is a void that needs to be filled with noise, with conversation, with scrolling, with presence. They treat aloneness like a waiting room, a dull, gray space you sit in until the real event begins. But for you, the person who genuinely prefers being alone, that waiting room is the main event. It is the destination. You rush through the social obligations of the day, the meetings, the small talk, the family gatherings, not because you hate them, but because you are trying to get back to the moment where you can finally be with the one person who understands you completely, yourself. This preference is one of the most misunderstood psychological traits in our modern world. We live in a culture that pathologizes solitude. If you eat lunch alone, people think you are sad. If you go to the movies alone, people think you are brave or pathetic. If you choose a Friday night in an empty apartment over a crowded bar, people assume you are depressed. We have conflated being alone with being lonely. We use the words interchangeably, as if physical proximity to other humans is the only metric for happiness. But you know the truth. You know that loneliness is not about the number of people in the room. You know that the most crushing, suffocating form of loneliness happens when you are surrounded by people who expect you to be someone you are not. And conversely, you know the profound, rich, vibrating fullness of sitting in a quiet room with a book or a project, or just your own thoughts and feeling entirely met. Today, in this video, we are going to dismantle the stigma surrounding the loner. We are going to go deep into the psychology of solitude competence. We are going to look at why your brain finds nourishment in silence while others find starvation. We are going to explore the developmental roots of self-sufficiency, the neuroscience of the default mode network, and why your ability to be alone is actually a sign of a highly developed, robust inner architecture. If you have ever felt a flash of irritation when a friend asks, "But won't you be lonely?" Or if you consider a weekend with zero plans to be the ultimate luxury, this analysis is for you. Let's begin by holding up a mirror to the experience because the preference for aloneness is often invisible to the outside world. To others, you might seem shy or aloof or maybe just quiet. But internally, your world is loud. It is vivid. For the person who prefers being alone, the external world is often seen as a place of interruption. When you are with people, even people you love, there is a tax being levied on your attention. You have to listen. You have to respond. You have to perform the facial gymnastics of empathy and interest. You have to compromise on what to eat, what to watch, where to walk, when to leave. Every social interaction, no matter how pleasant, is a negotiation of agency. You are constantly micro-adjusting your own desires to fit the group dynamic. But when you are alone, that tax disappears. You enter a state of total frictionlessness. You can eat what you want, when you want. You can stop walking to look at a tree for 10 minutes without having to explain why. You can change the song halfway through. You can stare into space and think about a complex problem without someone asking, "What's wrong?" This isn't just about selfishness or control. It is about cognitive flow. When you are alone, your thought process is uninterrupted. You can follow a thread of an idea from start to finish. You can build entire castles in your mind. The presence of another person acts as a constant context switch, forcing your brain to toggle between your inner world and the external reality. For you, that toggling is exhausting. It breaks the spell. You crave aloneness because it is the only state in which you can think deeply, feel deeply, and exist fully without fragmentation. However, society views this preference with deep suspicion. We are social primates. For millions of years, survival depended on the tribe. To be alone was to be dead. So we have an ancient, lizard-brain fear of the solitary individual. We label them. We call them antisocial. We call them recluses. We whisper about the neighbor who lives alone and never has guests. We assume that the preference for solitude is a defense mechanism, that you must have been hurt or rejected, or that you have attachment issues. And while trauma can certainly lead to isolation, that is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about the person who is securely attached, who has friends, who has social skills, but who simply chooses the company of the self because it is higher quality. This is a crucial distinction. You aren't running away from people because you fear them. You are running toward yourself because you like yourself. This brings us to the hidden pattern, the concept of social satiety and autonomy competence. Just as we all have different metabolisms for food, we have different metabolisms for social interaction. Some people have a high social hunger. They metabolize social contact quickly. They can spend 3 hours at a lunch, and by dinner time, they are starving for connection again. Their baseline state is connected, and they feel a deficit when they are alone. You, on the other hand, likely have a low social hunger and a slow social metabolism. A little bit goes a long way. A meaningful conversation with a friend is like a rich, heavy meal. It sustains you. You don't need to eat again for days. You need time to digest it. You need time to process what was said, how it felt, what it meant. If you are forced to eat again, to socialize again, before you have digested the last interaction, you feel nauseous. You feel socially bloated. Coupled with this is autonomy competence. This is the psychological capacity to regulate your own emotions and entertain your own mind without external input. Many people have low autonomy competence. When they are left alone in a quiet room, their anxiety spikes. They don't know what to do with their hands. They don't know where to look. Their inner critic gets loud. They need the mirror of another person to tell them they exist. They need the distraction of conversation to drown out their own thoughts. But you possess high autonomy competence. When the door shuts and the room goes quiet, you don't panic. You settle. Your nervous system regulates. You have a rich internal library of interests, memories, and ideas to draw upon. You are self-entertaining. You are the playwright, the actor, and the audience of your own life, all at once. You don't need the external mirror because you have an internal anchor. Let's expand on the deep psychology of this. Well, what is physically happening in the brain of the solitary person? Neuroscience gives us a fascinating clue in the default mode network, DMN. This is a network of interacting brain regions that is active when a person is not focused on the outside world. It lights up when you are daydreaming, envisioning the future, retrieving memories, or thinking about the perspective of others. For many, an overactive DMN is associated with rumination and anxiety. It's the voice that says, "You messed up," or "What if everything goes wrong?" But for the person who loves solitude, the default mode network is not a torture chamber. It is a playground. It is a creative studio. When you disengage from the external task of socializing, your brain doesn't spiral into anxiety. It ascends into imagination. This is why you cherish those long stretches of time alone, because that is when your DMN comes online and you do your best work. That is when you solve the problems. That is when you understand your own life. This is often why people who prefer being alone are drawn to solitary pursuits: writing, coding, painting, long-distance running, gardening. These aren't just hobbies. They are methods of engaging the DMN. They are flow states that require the absence of others to function. But where does this come from? Is it born or is it made? If we look at the developmental history of the solitary person, we often find a child who was self-soothing. While some infants scream until they are held, others have a natural capacity to calm themselves. As you grew, you might have been the child who was perfectly content playing in the corner with a set of blocks for hours. You didn't constantly run to your parents saying, "Watch this, look at me." You were engaged in a private dialogue with the world. There is a concept in psychoanalysis called the capacity to be alone in the presence of the other. The pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott argued that the ability to be alone is one of the most important signs of emotional maturity. He said that it begins when a child can play happily by themselves while the mother is nearby but not interacting. The child knows they are safe, so they don't need to check in. They can drift into their own world. If you prefer being alone as an adult, it is likely that you mastered this stage. You internalize the sense of safety. You carry the safe parent inside you. You don't need the constant reassurance of the group to know you are okay. You are, in a very real sense, your own parent, your own protector, and your own companion. However, this strength can become a point of friction as you enter the adult world. Because the adult world is not designed for the solitary. It is designed for the pack. We enter the adult consequences phase, and this is where the preference for aloneness stops being a quirk and starts being a conflict. Let's look at the workplace. The modern corporate environment is an extrovert's playground and a solitary person's nightmare. It's not just the open plan offices, it's the culture of collaboration. We are told that two heads are better than one. We are obsessed with brainstorming sessions, team huddles, and group projects. The underlying assumption is that thinking is a collective activity. If you are the person who says, "Can I just take this problem away, go into a dark room for 3 hours, and come back with the solution?" you are viewed with suspicion. You are seen as not a team player. But you know that for you, the group is often where ideas go to die. You know that the brainstorming session is usually just a contest of who can talk the loudest, not who has the best idea. You know that deep insight requires deep silence. Yet you are forced to perform the rituals of the group. You sit in the meetings that could have been emails, you nod, you participate. And you feel your energy draining away not because the work is hard, but because the method of work is incompatible with your biology. You might find yourself hiding in the bathroom stall just to get 5 minutes of sensory deprivation. You might take your lunch break in your car, driving to a remote parking lot, just to eat a sandwich without having to make conversation, and you feel guilty about it. You wonder, why is everyone else enjoying the happy hour? Why does everyone else seem to get energy from this, while I feel like I'm being harvested? Then there is the social stigma of the loner. In our society, loner is a loaded word. It is often associated with danger. When something bad happens in the news, the neighbors always say, "He was a quiet guy. He kept to himself." We have criminalized quietness. We have made the desire for privacy look like the concealment of a crime. So, you learn to mask. You learn to perform extroversion. You learn the script. You learn to smile, to ask questions, to laugh at the right times. You become a covert introvert. You can pass for one of them. You can work the room. But it is a performance. It is a costume you put on. And like any heavy costume, it is suffocating. You might have friends who don't actually know you. They know the mask. They know the person who shows up to the party, knocks back a few drinks, and makes jokes. They don't know the person who goes home and stares at the ceiling in silence for 2 hours to recover. They don't know that for you, the party was work. The silence is the reward. This creates a subtle but profound dissonance in your life. You are constantly being praised for your performance. "You're so fun. You should come out more." Which only reinforces the idea that your true self, the quiet, solitary self, is unlikable or boring. You start to believe that you are only valuable when you are on. And nowhere is this more painful than in the realm of romantic relationships. The traditional model of romance is one of enmeshment. Two become one. We are sold a narrative where true love means doing everything together, sleeping in the same bed, eating every meal together, spending every weekend together, texting constantly when you are apart. For the person who prefers being alone, this model is not romantic, it is claustrophobic. You might fall in love deeply, you might desire intimacy, but you also have a desperate biological need for air gap. You need time where you are not being perceived. You might be in a relationship where your partner interprets your need for solitude as rejection. You say, "I just need a few hours to myself." They hear, "I am tired of you." They come into the room and ask, "What are you thinking?" And you feel a spike of irritation, not because you are hiding something, but because the question itself forces you to translate your internal world into language, which breaks your flow. You want to just be, without having to explain being. You might find yourself sabotaging relationships just to get your space back. You might pick fights so you can storm out and drive alone. You might break up with perfectly good partners because the labor of constant companionship is just too heavy. And then comes the inevitable question from well-meaning family members. Don't you worry you'll end up alone? They say it like a threat. They say it like a curse. The image of the old person dying alone is used to terrorize us into conformity. But when you hear that question, you might feel a confusing lack of fear. You visualize your future apartment. Quiet, organized, filled with your books and your things. And it doesn't look like a tragedy to you. It looks like peace. But you can't say that. You can't say, "Actually, that sounds lovely." Because to say that is to admit that you have opted out of the primary game of humanity. So you stay silent. You smile. You say, maybe one day I'll find the right person. But deep down, you know that the right person would be someone who leaves you alone. This leads us to the internal conflict recognition. Even if you are confident in your preference, the sheer weight of societal pressure eventually cracks your resolve. You start to pathologize yourself. You ask, is it safe to be this alone? You ask, am I missing out on life? You ask, is my independence actually just fear of intimacy disguised as strength? You see other people crying over breakups, desperate to not be single, and you wonder why you don't feel that desperation. You wonder if your heart is broken. You wonder if you are capable of love. You live in a paradox. You are most happy when you are alone, but you are most anxious about the fact that you are happy alone. You are fighting a war between your biological nature and your cultural programming. Your body wants solitude, but your superego wants belonging. And this conflict prevents you from fully enjoying the solitude you have fought for. When you finally get that weekend alone, a small voice in the back of your head whispers, "You are weird. You are broken. You should be out there." But let's pause the judgment. Let's stop looking at this through the lens of what is normal and start looking at it through the lens of what is true. What if your preference for aloneness is not a deficiency? What if it is a different kind of abundance? Consider the sheer logistical and emotional efficiency of the solitary life. While others are spending 80% of their emotional energy managing the moods, needs, and conflicts of a group, you are directing 100% of your energy towards your own cultivation. You are not distracted. You are not diluted. The person who can be alone is the person who is never bored. Think about what a superpower that is, to be dropped into any environment with nothing but your own mind and to be completely content. To not need the constant drip feed of external validation to feel real. Most people are terrified of the silence because that is when their demons come out. They keep the TV on, the music up, the calendar full, because they cannot bear to sit with themselves. But you? You sit with yourself every day. You know your demons by name. You have had coffee with them. You have a relationship with your own interiority that most people will never achieve. The question is not, why do you prefer being alone? The question is, why is everyone else so terrified of it? In the next part of this analysis, we are going to pivot from the diagnosis to the celebration. We are going to look at how to structure a life that honors this need without apology. We are going to talk about the concept of solitude as a primary relationship. We are going to validate the specific joy of the table for one. And we are going to look at how to communicate this need to others so you can have love and space, not one or the other. Because being alone is not the same as being lonely. And it is time we learned the difference. We need to stop right here. We need to stop the shame spiral that tells you your nature is a mistake. If you take nothing else from this video, hear this. Your capacity for solitude is not a malfunction. It is a high-level psychological skill. Psychologists call this emotional autarky. In economics, autarky refers to a nation that is self-sufficient, one that does not need to import resources to survive. In psychology, it refers to a person who can generate their own emotional stability, their own entertainment, and their own meaning without needing to import it from other people constantly. Think about how rare that is. We live in a world of profound codependency. Most people are emotional importers. They need someone to validate their outfit. They need someone to listen to their vent session to calm down. They need a crowd to feel excitement. They are constantly outsourcing their internal regulation to the external world. But you are an exporter. You generate your own peace. You generate your own interests. When you are alone, you aren't without resources. You are sitting at the source. This is why you are often the rock for your friends. Because you aren't needy, people find your presence calming. You are the eye of the storm. We need to validate the fact that this aloneness is actually a form of protection. For the highly sensitive person, and many who prefer solitude are highly sensitive, the world is abrasive. It is loud. It is aggressive. Your preference for being alone is simply a preference for a non-abrasive environment. It is a preference for safety. You are not rejecting people. You are protecting your instrument. You wouldn't leave a Stradivarius violin out in the rain, and you shouldn't leave your nervous system out in the chaos. This brings us to the reframing and meaning shift. We need to change the story you tell yourself about your life. We need to shift from the loner narrative, which is about deficit, to the soloist narrative. In music, the soloist is not the person who couldn't make it into the orchestra. The soloist is the virtuoso. The soloist is the one capable of carrying the melody without support. You need to start viewing your solitude as your primary relationship. Society tells us that our primary relationship must be with a romantic partner or a parent or a best friend. But the truth is, the longest relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. You are the only person who has been there for every breath, every thought, every heartbeat, and every dream. You're the only person who will be there until the very end. Why wouldn't you want to spend time with that person? Why wouldn't you want to cultivate that relationship? When you spend a Friday night alone, you aren't doing nothing. You are on a date with the self. You are nurturing the primary relationship. You are listening to your own needs. You are learning your own mind. This isn't sad. It is essential. It is the foundation upon which all other relationships are built. If you cannot be happy alone, you will never be happy together, because you will always be using the other person as a distraction from yourself. We also need to reframe boredom. The terrifying thing for the extrovert is the empty hour. But for you, the empty hour is the canvas. You understand that boredom is just the waiting room for creativity. You are willing to sit in the quiet until something true emerges. This is the secret of the great artists, the writers, the monks, the philosophers. They were all people who preferred being alone. They understood that the signal-to-noise ratio of the world is too low. To hear the signal, the inspiration, the insight, the divine, you have to turn off the noise. You are part of that lineage. You are not a failed socialite. You are a latent philosopher. Now let's talk about ownership transfer. How do you take this understanding and use it to navigate a world that wants to consume you? It starts with social budgeting. You need to treat your social energy like a bank account. You have a fixed income of social energy each week. Every interaction costs money. A coffee with a close friend might cost $10. A loud party might cost $100. A family reunion might cost $500. Most people live in social debt. They overspend. They say yes to everything because they feel guilty, and then they end up emotionally bankrupt, irritable, exhausted, and resentful. Ownership means looking at your budget and saying, I cannot afford that. It means saying no without an elaborate excuse. You don't need to invent a fake illness. You don't need to say your car broke down. You can say, I'm at my capacity for the week, so I'm going to stay in and recharge. Let's catch up next week. This is radical honesty, and you will be surprised by how much people respect it. When you stop apologizing for your boundaries, people stop trying to push them. You teach people how to treat you. If you treat your time alone as sacred, they will learn to treat it as sacred too. Ownership also means designing your life for low-friction living. If you prefer being alone, you should structure your career and your home to support that. In your career, look for roles that reward independent work. Look for the individual contributor track rather than the management track. You don't have to manage people to be successful. You can be the coder, the writer, the researcher, the artisan. You can be the expert who works in the deep end of the pool. In your home, create a sanctuary. If you live with others, family, or roommates, you need a designated air gap. You need a room, or even just a chair, that is a no-talk zone. You need to communicate to the people you live with. When I am in this chair or when the door is closed, I am not available. It's not because I am mad at you. It's because I am rebooting. This leads us to the healing orientation. Healing for the person who prefers being alone is not about coming out of your shell. It is about making the shell more comfortable. It involves practicing deliberate solitude. Many of us end up alone by accident or by default, and we spend that time doom-scrolling or numbing out. That is junk solitude. Healing means engaging in nutritious solitude. This means planning your alone time with the same intention you would plan a party. Tonight, I am going to cook a complex meal for myself. Saturday morning, I am going to go for a 3-hour walk without headphones. Sunday, I am going to write. Make it a ritual. Light a candle. Put on music. Elevate the experience. Prove to yourself that your own company is worth the good china. Prove to yourself that you are worth the effort. Healing also means navigating relationships differently. You don't have to follow the standard script. You can have a living apart together, a LAT relationship, where you and your partner maintain separate residences. This is becoming increasingly common among people who value autonomy. You have the intimacy of partnership without the constant friction of cohabitation. Or if you do live together, you can practice parallel play. This is where you are in the same room as your partner, but you are doing different things. You are reading, they are gaming. There is no conversation. There is just the comfortable weight of each other's presence. This is the introvert's love language. It says, I love you enough to let you be alone near me. You need to communicate this need early. Don't wait until you are trapped to tell someone you need space. Tell them on the first date. I am someone who needs a lot of alone time to function. It's how I recharge. The right person will understand. The wrong person will try to fix you. Let the wrong person go. And finally, we move to the grounded, hopeful closure. What happens when you finally stop fighting your nature? What happens when you accept that you are a creature of the quiet? You become a person of immense integrity. The word integrity comes from the word integer, meaning whole or undivided. When you are constantly performing for others, you are divided. You are fractured into a dozen different personas. But when you are alone, you are an integer. You are whole. You are one thing. You inherit a life of density. Your life might look small from the outside. You might not have 1 million followers. You might not be at the gala. You might not have a packed schedule. But inside your life is vast. It is deep. It is rich with thought and feeling and memory. You realize that you are not missing out on the world. You are simply engaging with it on a different frequency. You are engaging with the vertical dimension of life, depth, while everyone else is racing across the horizontal dimension, breadth. You become the keeper of the quiet places. In a world that is screaming itself hoarse, you are the silence between the notes that makes the music possible. You are the pause that gives the sentence meaning. You look at your empty apartment, your quiet weekend, your solo drive, and you don't see a void. You see a fullness. You see a space that is entirely yours to fill or to leave empty as you choose. So, the next time someone asks, aren't you lonely? You can smile, a genuine secret smile, and think, lonely? I have myself, and I am enough. You are not the one who is lost. You are the one who has found the center. Stay there. Enjoy the silence. It belongs to you. Let's go deeper into the architecture of the solitary life because this is where the practical rubber meets the road. If you are going to commit to this life, if you are going to own the fact that you prefer being alone, you have to build a life that can sustain it. You have to stop building a life for an extrovert and then wondering why it doesn't fit. This means rethinking your friendships. The traditional model of friendship is high frequency, low stakes. It's hanging out, it's stopping by, it's group chats that ping 400 times a day. For you, this is death by 1,000 cuts. You need to curate a low-maintenance, high-depth social circle. You need friends who understand the submarine model of friendship. Submarines go dark for months. They dive deep. They are on a mission. And then they surface, transmit a burst of high-quality data, and dive again. You need friends who don't freak out if you don't text back for 3 days. You need friends who know that your silence isn't abandonment, it's immersion. When you find these friends, and they are often other people who prefer being alone, hold on to them. They are rare. A friendship where you can sit in silence together is worth 10 friendships where you have to shout to be heard. It also means rethinking your consumption of information. People who love being alone are often information sponges. Because you aren't spending your energy on people, you are spending it on ideas. But this can be a trap. If you replace physical company with digital noise, if you are alone in your room but scrolling TikTok for 4 hours, you aren't actually alone. You are in a crowded room of ghosts. You are letting thousands of people into your sanctuary through the glowing rectangle in your hand. True ownership of your solitude means protecting it from the digital crowd as well. It means practicing digital asceticism. Turn the phone off, not just silent, off. Experience the radical sensation of being completely unreachable. In a world where everyone is expected to be on call 24/7, being unreachable is the ultimate power move. It is a declaration of sovereignty. It says, my attention is not a public utility, and we must address the fear of the future. This is the big one. The cat lady trope. The sad bachelor trope. Society threatens you with the specter of the deathbed regret. They say, no one wishes they worked more. They wish they spent more time with loved ones. But notice the nuance. Loved ones. That implies quality, not quantity. The person who prefers being alone often loves more deeply because they love selectively. You are not destined for a sad, lonely old age. In fact, studies show that people who are comfortable with solitude are more resilient in old age. Why? Because as we age, our social circles naturally shrink. People move, people pass away, mobility decreases. The extrovert who relies entirely on external stimulation often crumbles in old age. They lose their supply. But you have spent a lifetime building an internal cathedral. You have spent a lifetime learning how to be interested in the world without needing to be the center of it. You are prepared. You have the resources. You are not the sad loner. You are the elder sage. You are the one who has the wisdom that comes from silence. Let's also talk about the spiritual dimension of this, regardless of your religious beliefs. Throughout human history, the withdrawal from the crowd has been seen as the first step toward enlightenment. The Desert Fathers, the Forest Monks, the Vision Quest. Every major spiritual tradition agrees you cannot find the truth in the market. You find it on the mountain. When you prefer being alone, you are unconsciously aligning yourself with this search for truth. You are stripping away the Maya, the illusion of the social game, to see what is real. You feel the seasons change. You notice the light. You feel the passage of time not as a deadline, but as a rhythm. There is a holiness to your solitude. Do not let the world profane it with their pity. So, how do you integrate this? You stop viewing your life as a series of apologies. You stop saying, I'm sorry I'm like this. You start saying, this is how I function best. You recognize that your energy is a finite resource, and you have the right to allocate it. If you spend 90% of your energy on yourself and 10% on others, but that 10% is pure, focused, and loving, that is better than giving 100% of a resentful, exhausted, distracted self. Your solitude allows you to be a better person when you do show up. You bring new ideas to the conversation because you've had time to think them. You bring patience to the interaction because you've had time to rest. You bring authenticity because you haven't spent all day pretending. Your aloneness is the fuel for your togetherness.